This unfortunate season, expectations were high, but the wins just haven't been there. Now the trade deadline approaches, will the Raiders finally make that one move that could turn it all around? Or are we about to be left with more questions than answers? What's up, Raiders Nation? If you're a die-hard Raiders fan like me, and you won't want to miss out on any of the latest updates, make sure to hit the subscribe button and join the conversation. Now, let's break down the latest on the Raiders' trade deadline strategy. As we approach the November 5th trade deadline, it's no secret that Raider fans are anxious to see how the front office will handle this season's struggles. General Manager Tom Telesco was initially expected to be active, trying to add some draft capital to prepare for a rebuild. However, recent reports suggest a different strategy altogether. According to breaking news from Vic Taffer and Tashin Reed of The Athletic, it appears the Raiders plan to hold tight and avoid any major trades before the deadline. This is truly a shocking report and definitely got our attention. Fans were really curious to see what direction the Raiders would take as the trade deadline approached. This is especially interesting because the moves, or lack thereof, might tell us something about the job security of our head coach, Antonio Pierce. Think about it. If the Raiders decided to sell big, trading away players to stack up on future draft picks, that would signal Pierce has a solid chance of sticking around. It would mean owner Mark Davis is backing him and giving him a long-term plan to rebuild. But if the Raiders hold off on any major trades, it could mean Pierce's future isn't guaranteed and that he's coaching to secure his spot for next season. So what's the reasoning behind this approach? With 4 consecutive losses piling up, one might think that a sell-off of veterans would be the logical course of action. However, insiders say the Raiders don't view their current situation as a full-scale rebuild. They believe that with the right moves in the offseason, they could be competitive again by 2025. It's a bold stance considering the current state of the team. Let's break this down a bit further. The Raiders are sitting at the bottom of the AFC West, and barring a miraculous turnaround, they're not going to make the playoffs this year. Despite their struggles, team sources indicate that owner Mark Davis, Telesco, and Pierce still believe there's potential within the current roster. This perspective is puzzling, especially considering the team's performance this season. One major issue plaguing the Raiders has been their talent level, particularly at the quarterback position. The struggles at quarterback have been evident, and injuries haven't helped either. The combination of poor play and injuries has led to a disappointing season. Given this context, standing pat might seem like a missed opportunity to bolster the roster through trades. Let's talk about the quarterback situation. The Raiders have cycled through several quarterbacks over the past few years, and the inconsistency has been detrimental. Whether it's been a lack of experience, injuries, or just plain poor performance, the Raiders need stability at the most critical position on the field. This season, it's been clear that finding a reliable quarterback is imperative for the Raiders' future. So, if the Raiders were to consider trading away some veterans, who might they look to move? Unfortunately, they don't have many players left who would fetch significant draft capital. It's a tough situation because while they need to improve the roster, trading away veterans could further weaken the team in the short term. That said, there are still some names floating around as potential trade candidates. Players like wide receiver Jakobi Meyers, left tackle Kolton Miller, and defensive tackle John Jenkins have been mentioned, but it's unclear how much value they could bring back in a trade. Let's break down each of these players. Starting with Jakobi Meyers, signed to a 3-year, $33 million deal. Back in the 2023 offseason, he was brought in specifically for his familiarity with McDaniel's offense from their time with the New England Patriots. Last year, he delivered a solid performance with 807 yards and 8 touchdowns. This season, he's got 325 yards on 31 catches with 2 touchdowns so far. If the Raiders really are shifting offensive strategies, it's likely we've already seen the best of Jakobi Meyers. Trading him for a 4th-round pick would have made sense, freeing up cap space to potentially sign someone like T. Higgins in the offseason, or even to draft a promising wide receiver. Building up those options for the future makes a lot of sense, right? However, recent reports indicate that the Raiders are not fully committed to selling. Dan Graziano from ESPN noted that the Raiders were exploring trades for Meyers, Jenkins, and even Cody Whitehair, but it seems like those discussions haven't gained much traction. Whitehair's name is particularly puzzling, as he doesn't seem to carry much trade value. At this point, if another team offered us a bag of chips, I'd probably take it. Then there's left tackle Kolton Miller. He's an intriguing trade candidate, especially considering his struggles recently. Last season, injuries held him back, and he missed out on a lot of training camp this year, which has clearly impacted his performance early in the season. While Miller showed consistent growth in his early years, it feels like his development plateaued around 2022. He's given up some sacks this season, and while left tackle is a tough position to fill, it seems like trading him would have been the hardest move to pull off before the deadline. Looks like Miller is sticking around for at least another season, but the Raiders definitely need to have a backup plan. It's time to seriously consider investing in the left tackle position because, let's be honest, Miller hasn't been performing up to par this year. There's a chance he could bounce back if he fully recovers from that shoulder injury, but in the NFL, it's all about what you've done lately, and his performance has been slipping since last season. It almost feels like he's hit his peak. Now, if the Raiders are indeed aiming for a competitive team by 2025, they need to focus on their draft strategy. Telesco seems to have made some solid choices in his first few drafts, nailing picks like Brock Bowers, Jackson Powers-Johnson, and DJ Glaze, which provide a solid foundation for the offense moving forward. The number one goal by a country mile in 2025 will be landing a franchise quarterback, something the Raiders failed to do last offseason. That's certainly a blemish on Telesco's record, but he deserves another chance to get it right. The current draft order has the Raiders sitting in the number 6 spot for the 2025 NFL Draft, and they're within striking distance to land any of the top signal callers available. If they want to compete, they need to find a true leader under center. The next few weeks will be crucial as the Raiders look to position themselves for a better draft spot. With a few more losses, they could improve their standing significantly. In this context, it makes sense for the team to prioritize losses over wins. Every game they lose brings them closer to the opportunity to draft a game-changing quarterback. Let's talk about the implications of potentially standing pat at the trade deadline. It's interesting because it could signal to fans that the organization is committed to building around the current roster rather than tearing it down completely. But is that the right approach? Many fans are frustrated and want to see action. The reality is that any hope for a Raiders playoff run this season is pretty much done. At 2-6, this team just isn't performing at a playoff level. This brings us back to the coaching staff. While it seems the organization has faith in Pierce and Telesco, is that faith justified? They have to make the right decisions moving forward, especially as the 2025 draft approaches. We've seen how crucial a solid draft can be for building a competitive team, and the pressure is on them to nail it. While it may seem counterintuitive, standing pat at the trade deadline might be the strategy the Raiders believe in. They're banking on internal optimism and hoping that with a strong offseason, they can bounce back and become competitive again by 2025. The focus right now should be on assessing talent and preparing for the future. However, the question remains, do you think this decision signals that head coach Antonio Pierce's job might be on the line? If he's feeling that pressure, I can understand why he wouldn't want to trade away established veterans for draft picks. Those picks wouldn't help him in the short term at all. We want to hear your thoughts. Are you on board with the idea of standing pat, or do you believe it's time for a complete overhaul? Do you want to see some veterans traded away, or do you think the current roster just needs some fine-tuning? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And that's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed the content and want to stay updated on all the stuff about Raiders, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.